What's the pulse of Legacy right now?
Next on Eternal Turtles.
Big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters. If you want to support the channel, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurtles. In return, you'll get ad-free content and a bonus episode every single week. Thanks for watching. Hello and welcome to Eternal Turtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blechman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Zach, I mean, it's the pulse of the format is it's flatlined, right? Like, I can't win a game for the life of me, Zach. No, I'm kidding. I'm actually doing pretty well.
It's wild because we had that episode with Crucible Words a little after I think early January, talking about like when do you think the next time there would be a no card ban announcement for Legacy. And I have to say, based on what I'm seeing online, just the scuttlebutt, to coin a turn of phrase that our old co-host Nate Golia used to like to say, the scuttlebutt around the format is that things are okay. No one's in love with the format, I would say, but no one is losing their minds because there are some overpowered cards that need to be dealt with immediately, and that the format is completely awash with just broken combo decks that you only get to make relevant decisions in the first 2 turns, that sort of thing. It feels like the format is in a place right now where could use improvements, but nothing is so dire that it's making people not want to play the game.
I mean, I agree with part of that. I think that there is some amount of the, we are somewhat desensitized to the stuff that does violate what you were just talking about. And it's sort of just like, okay, well, we know the next ban announcement coming up is in a month. And so we just hope that they make some moves on the power outliers that otherwise infringe upon what you just said. I mean, I had a conversation recently with a bunch of the control mages in the Blue Eyed X Discord that, the talk about Sowing Micospawn's existence in the format just sort of obsoletes the entire macro type because it threatens it because Eldrazi is one of the top decks, because Ancient Tomb decks prey on that stuff, but even more so when they just have access to, a bunch of strip mines, or, one-sided Armageddons and what have you before you can take a turn. And I think that the way that I have approached that sort of stuff to not become so down on the format that on the whole, otherwise, I think does align with what you were talking about, with what you said. The way that I engage with that stuff is I now no longer am engaging with it in a way that is serious, because there isn't actually the tools to combat those types of things. And so, well, sometimes it's not always going to get you 100% of the time, but at the same time, I think that the stuff that exists, whether that's Entomb Atraxa, and that's the bulk of the top tables, or Ancient Tomb involving Sowing Micospawn, or any of the stuff that just makes it so that games are unfun. I think there's the difference between unfun and souring your experience to want to even play at all are different things. I think unfun is subjective. Everybody's going to have unfun, and that will be dependent on what you're doing, right? Yes, I find it to be exceptionally unfun whenever my opponent has Orcus Bowmasters in their deck. But that is not the case for the, players that don't care about drawing cards. So Orcus Bowmasters just is not something that they think about at all. So unfun is a range. But when it comes to souring the experience, there are some cards that just regardless of what you're doing, just make the game feel like, why are we even doing this? And so I think getting rid of those cards in the next ban announcement would just be a net positive for the game. But the way the way that I engage with those cards now until they are removed is the way that I just dealt with Initiative, where it's just I am just going to choose to not have that be part of my experience and accept that the losses that will be incurred because those cards do exist and there are players that choose to play them, despite it being rancid. I have just accepted that, that's part of the matchup lottery is sometimes you will just have a loss ticked onto your record for something that otherwise you don't have the tools to defeat because it's otherwise broken, busted, or rancid. And I'm just not going to let it sour my experience. There are plenty of videos of me playing on 19's MTG where the second an initiative creature touches the table, just disengage, just pick up my cards, no sweat equity lost on it. no emotional hardship put on it. It's just horseshit that it exists, and I'm going to choose to not engage with it. And let me tell you, man, that feels great. It feels great to not like it is clearly a cancer, but like I'm just not going to endeavor trying to have cancer treated when there's no treatment for it.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield.com. Moxfield is the best deck building website on the internet. You can find all of my and Phil's decks in links below, including decks from this episode. And if you do, you'll be directly supporting the channel. Well, let's put up those cards that we think that, you know, could be in the conversation, right? So, you know, Sowing Micospawn, obviously. Orcus Bowmasters is still a card that people are talking about. I would not be upset to see that card go. I think Nadu is worth throwing out there, but I truly don't think Nadu, you know, is a big offender versus the other two cards that I've mentioned. Do you have any other cards that you can think of that like are those line stepper cards that like need to be even looked at?
Yeah, I think that the cards that you mentioned, I mean, I'm always going to have it's a range though, because like I'm always going to have Urza Saga on that list. And
sure,
but that's more so because it's like the fact that it can tutor 0 and 1 mana things means that 0 and 1 mana things now just get the like that huge surge in power. But like I don't want to linger too long on that because I don't think many people are in that camp. But I think that like there are a ton of offenders that are otherwise like it's just the Ancient Tomb problem, right? It's like every single two and a pip card that's ever printed, you just have to look at it as a turn 1 play, and that's an Ancient Tomb problem. And as long as we're protecting Ancient Tomb, then those things are always going to be a problem. And it's the same thing with Days, right? Like it's the stuff that like you have to look at something in the context of what cards those the context of those cards propping them up and making them more powerful. Because like a 3-drop is not a 3-drop; it's a 1-drop. A spell like on turn 1 on the play is actually going to convert a ton of advantage if it offers that, and your opponent will not be able to take any game action at all because it is backed by this card that just doesn't allow it because of the natural mechanic of how you go second. Like there are always going to be those things baked in, and so the cards that otherwise have, you know, inherent flaws like that, I think are always going to be in the conversation. They'll just never be touched. But I agree.
I guess also Entomb and Reanimate are cards that we could lump into that group that like they could talk about these.
Thank you for stopping me from rambling on too long. I was going to say that I agree that the other one that has some heat on it and still has heat on it is Entomb. But like I think that it's interesting because I think that the what Entomb does for the Reanimator deck is indeed more powerful than pretty much any other tutor type card that exists in the format, because the cards that it can dump are just so powerful. But I don't know if it is like, I think there would be an interesting conversation to have, just a sole dedicated conversation to, let's say we wanted to solve one of these two problems because the Beer Reanimator is still the top deck and it is still like arguably too good. Is the problem Entomb because it just means that you get to narrow your package down so significantly? Or is the problem that Reanimate as a 1-mana card allows you to reanimate anything now that is part of your mana base which has multiple Entombs in it? So like if you can tutor, if you have a fetch land and you can dump a troll into your yard, well, that's sort of like an additional Entomb, assuming that 6/5 unblockable is something that you'd otherwise care about. Similarly, having Surveil lands in the format now means that your mana base just has incidental Entombs.
Yeah.
And so, like, while like those are a little bit more variance, there is the difference between like, okay, I'm going to Ponder Brainstorm or otherwise set up the top of my deck to then Entomb, and you can do on turn 2, you can still go turn 1 cantrip, set up the top of my deck if you find the thing, play your Surveil land, Entomb it to the yard, and then still Reanimate because it's a 1-mana play. So there's the argument that because Reanimate is the only spell that does what it does for a single mana, everything else that is reasonable to play is at 2 mana, that cutting off Reanimate as opposed to like nothing does what Entomb does as efficiently as Entomb.
I was about to say there is one card called Unmarked Grave that was printed in Modern Horizons 2. It is a 2-mana non-legendary version of Entomb.
Yeah. So it's 2 mana and it's a sorcery.
Indeed. Okay. Yeah, this is also true. Yeah.
2 mana, sorcery speed. Can't get legendary creatures, which means that Archon is really the best thing to be doing.
Yeah.
So you
Fine.
know,
Don't
it's
get
like
a Traxa. I'm happy about that.
you can't get Attraction, you can't get Grizzlebrand, and you know, I mean, there is. Then there's the third wing of that conversation is, at what point is it like, okay, I remember a long time before Atraxa came around where it was the like, okay, at some point Grizzlebrand needs to be considered on the block, right? Like
Yeah.
there is just no other option
I mean,
other
we used to
than
talk about like we used to just say this card would be good, but for Grizzlebrand. I think we literally like I'm
the
sure I
time.
can find a clip of us saying that about Atraxa specifically, like being
Probably.
like this card would
Yeah.
probably be pretty good and definitely would be a neat reanimation target if Grizzlebrand didn't exist, and that was the one time we were wrong.
Well, it was the one time we were wrong for a bunch of different contexts, though. Like the fact that Atraxa is an ETB trigger that doesn't cost you life, so like your opponent can't your life total beyond the reanimate just doesn't matter, right? Like with Grizzlebrand, it's like you had to take 8, so if your opponent got an aggro start in any capacity against you, or could try and burn you out before you could close, like actually get the effect of your spell, because the life on the reanimate plus the life on paying for Grizzlebrand, that was a huge factor. And then also your fatty being able to be pitch cast to any of the pitch spells is also a relevant factor. And then, you know, there's in combat against stuff otherwise, like vigilance and lifelink are both very good. Anyway, but like I think that there's the additional wing of the conversation where it's like, okay, well, you don't necessarily have to get rid of Entomb and Reanimate, but then you have to look at cards like Atraxa or Grizzlebrand in the same way that you do White Plume Adventurer, where it's like, if we're going to protect Ancient Tomb, then you have to get rid of the offenders that are otherwise making the deck too good, and there isn't anything that you can hit out unless you actually go after the shell, in which case it's like, okay, yeah, when we look at it through that lens, like, yeah, White Plume being a product of like, it's too good coming down on turn 1. It's like, okay, yeah, that's the same for all of the fatties. And if all of the fatties just stop at, okay, well, nothing is going to be as good as Grizzlebrand or Atraxa, so maybe you look at getting rid of Grizzlebrand and Atraxa, and then the Reanimator decks can still be strong because there's still plenty of targets, but it's not, oh, you know, the game is functionally over on the spot. Now, what does that look like in real life if we actually did that? Like, what is the next best thing? And what is the, you know, are those gameplay patterns also still just horrendous? Maybe, I don't know.
We have to ban. You'd have to ban a lot of fatties because, like, then you go to Valgavoth, then you go like.
But Valgavoth not performing any intrinsic value? Like, okay, well, do we know of, like, okay, maybe you play Valgavoth. It offers you no card advantage. You're now down a card between the Entomb and Reanimate, and then, you know, players are like, okay, well, in order to combat that, I'm going to put Innocent Blood in my deck or whatever. And it's like, you know, there are ways that like those cards, it's like you can look for things to solve problems in ways that like Atraxa and Grizzlebrand just don't care because they draw their
curfew.
You know, but for real though, right? Like that's when you're looking to solve a problem like that is a legitimate way to answer it. Where it's like, there just isn't that against the current fatties. So it's like, I think, like, do you want to look at Entomb as being the most powerful version of what it does? Do you want to look at Reanimate being the most powerful version of what it does? Or are we just going to lump Entomb and Reanimate into the Ancient Tomb Days area of protected pillars? Perhaps. And then we have to then look at, okay, well, if that's the case, then there's a bunch of cards on the ban list because Days exists. There's a bunch of cards on the ban list because Ancient Tomb exists.
Hey, Legacy fans, since you're enjoying the show, please like and subscribe the video. It helps the channel grow.
Support Eternal Turtles on Patreon so we can create even more content and cover events.
Patreons get an ad-free RSS feed, 4 bonus episodes a month, and Discord recognition. Join the Dirtle Maniacs at patreon.com/EternalDirtles.
Now back to the show.
We get to a point where Phil, you almost want to. Here's the problem with Entomb. Entomb basically makes it so that any one good creature is five creatures in your deck, right? It's the 5. You now have 5 of what you need, right? So you can't do the same. You can't pull the same trigger vintage pulls when they're like, okay, sure, you can have 4, what's called workshops, but like we're gonna one of every other payoff that you can have. So it's just 56 cards and 4 workshops. You can't do that. One, for several reasons, you can't do that in Legacy. One, because it doesn't matter if you restrict all these other cards because you only need is a one of, right? You almost want them to restrict Entomb, but you don't restrict stuff in this format,
But I think that's the argument. Like, I think that's the direction that the conversation needs to go. I think, like, you either, like, if WotC's not going to give us a philosophy, then if they're only going to listen to what the community voices as things that they want gone, right? Like, like if we're going to argue that Psychic Frog is too good, and we're going to argue that Dread Order Kinnish is too good, and we're going to argue that blah 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 down the line, right? If they are only banning cards based on community sentiment because that's where they are for Legacy, then at what point do we just have to go, okay, us as the community know that we have that kind of say, like that kind of sway with WotC. Like if we're loud enough about a particular thing, they will take action on it because that's what they have done every other time. And if that is true, if we accept that premise, then okay, let's all agree that if we either want Entomb Reanimate as a target, or if we're going to lump those into the Ancient Tomb and Days pantheon of insulated things that we just can't touch because, oh man, they were grandfathered in. Okay, well then we have to start looking at every single time a 2-mana card with a pip, we have to look at Ancient Tomb. Every time there's a powerful 1-drop that accrues advantage, we always have to look at Days. Every
time a monster hits,
every time a monster hits. And if that's the world that we want to be in, then it's like, okay, yeah, you got to get rid of Attraction, you got to get rid of Grizzlebrand. The next time they print whatever overpowered fatty they print that generates overwhelming card advantage that ends the game on the spot if it comes down on turn 2 or turn 1, it's like, okay, well, none of those cards have ever been cast, right? Like, nobody's ever putting them in their deck to be.
No one's ever put Tidespout Tyrant into play.
Like, I'm sure that there are times where there's the off times where it's like, yeah, you had multiple Dark Rituals or whatever, and you hard cast
draft.
But you have never put those cards in your deck to put them into play with their casting cost. So their casting cost is irrelevant. It's just what their effect says. They're just the biggest thing with the biggest effect, and the biggest effect typically ends the game on the spot it touches the table. If that's the case, that every time a card otherwise touches the table, it just makes the game functionally over, then okay, we either accept that that's just going to be the best deck because now the Reanimate shell has the Reanimate shell is just a blue-black mana base. That's it. Yeah. That's the shell. It's those cards, it's the 10 cards plus a blue-black mana base. That's all you need, and now you got a top-tier tempo deck. So if that's the world we're in now, and we're not going to go after like the chafe like Troll of Khazad-dûm or whatever, the Surveil lands are here to stay. So like I think you got to be like, okay, where are we now? Is it the fatties that have to go?
It could be interesting to see them take a shot at Troll, but like it's an uninteresting shot to me. But it is something that could solve the problem, at least power down the deck enough so that like we don't really care so much when someone shows up with it. It used to be like, I mean, for people who haven't been playing Legacy for that long, it used to be that the guy at your local that played Reanimator was like new to the format. You were like, yep, he's going to win like 1 or 2 games tonight at the local. Maybe he has a hot streak and wins 3 matches. Sorry, matches, not games. But anybody who has sideboard hate just ruins this guy's day.
I want to point out. Let me just say, I would 10 out of 10 times, 100 out of 100 times, Zach, every single time, 100% of the time, I would rather play against Blue-Black Reanimator as it is in its present day than ever have to play against Black-Red Reanimator of Days of Old.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah, the Black-Red Reanimator deck was, you just hoped that you never got paired against it because it was like Glass Cannon, ruin your day, you don't take any game actions, like annoying combo. Like it was the stuff that like I feel like would make people not want to play Legacy. Like
people play like what was that White Angel that like was like a free days.
Oh yeah, Chancellor of the Annex. But Black Red Reanimator was a deck where it was like, I just am looking to make sure that like whoever across the table from me is irrelevant. It just doesn't matter that you're there.
Yeah.
Where like
it's not even Storm,
with this one,
like
It's just like that. I don't like. I feel like we sort of get rose-colored glasses looking back in history, but like Black Red Reanimator was awful. It was
obnoxious.
Terrible.
Yes.
It was a blight on the format. Like
it was terrible for 2 reasons. Either it was terrible because you lost, or it was terrible because watching your opponent like salt out because they couldn't do their thing, and then lose to like a Stifle or like a Daze. Like just like
you want to know. Like Black Red Reanimator is like in that space where it's like it's just faster dredge, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, yeah, you can, like, Dredge only has like one thing that it can really do, and if you can beat it, and sometimes you're going to lose to it because you're unprepared or whatever, but like Blackroot Reanimator was just like, there were games where it's just like, yep, open up my Chancellor and I'm on the play, and you just don't take any game actions, and there actually isn't anything that you can do, and you are just dead, and it's just like the glass cannon type combo decks that are like that where it's just like, I get that, like, it's part of the experience or whatever, I guess sometimes, and that's like the power of what, but like it really shouldn't. Like, I don't think that we as a community should accept that like decks like that should exist. I'm in that space for oops all spells, like, oh, it's cool, it's part of the thing that like your opponent can like do this like really powerful thing, and this is the area of the game that you get to do it. Like, I just listened to Mark Rosewater's podcast literally
I'm sorry.
yesterday, where he's talking about how in order for a game to be fun, like, we have to design cards that players actually get to play the game. And he's like, a lot of the problems with early days of Magic was they over-indexed, where a lot of the cards just say your opponent doesn't get to play, and like they shy away from that. Now,
what's wrong?
The thing is, well, I think that there's some amount of, I don't know if that's true, Mark, because a lot of the cards that are seeing printed are so overwhelmingly snowbally that like games effectively end anyway. But
yeah.
But like the sentiment there is, if the game is only fun if both players that are engaging in it get to play at least a little bit, then I think your decks that can consistently turn one with no real recourse just shouldn't exist, even if they aren't too good or too powerful for the format. It's just like, I just don't think that inherently should be allowed. That's my take on it. So like, if it comes down to, hey, everybody, like, if we ban this stuff, then Blackroot Reanimator is just the best version of Reanimator to play again, I feel like we would be like, oh, please, just give us the fatty back and let us have blue black again. Like, just let blue black be 30% of the field again, because nobody wants to play against glass cannon shit.
Yeah, but the thing is I feel like those decks, like, we can look back with rose-colored glasses, because that wasn't 30% of the meta. That was one guy at a 30-person tournament that played Black-Red Reanimator. And yeah, maybe you got matched up with him, but like, you generally didn't. Maybe two guys in a 30-person tournament were playing Black-Red Reanimator. Mostly you were playing Delvermeres, and you were playing like, Maverick, or you were playing against like Death and Taxes, like occasionally you'd play Show and Tell, but you didn't play Black-Red Reanimator like every other round like you do now.
But at the time, Black-Red Reanimator didn't have the reanimation package as part of its mana base.
No, it did not.
Like, we don't know what that looks like now. If they were like, hey, why don't we just take out the blue cards, become glass cannon combo, and we're just infinitely more consistent because we have a reanimation package baked into our deck, and we can just go, okay,
people are doing that online.
Totally.
But they're
like,
playing like the Road Warrior Dragon version of the deck, and like trying to like infinite to the point where they can get like hard cast a Grizzlebrand, and that's fine. It's not. It's honestly, it's rather boring to play against, but like, it's not that bad.
Now, I think both of those problems, though, are solved by doing any of those things. Like, any of the touch Entomb, touch Reanimate, or touch all of the fatties that otherwise end the game immediately when they touch down, and just being like, okay, the threshold for, if the argument is Entomb and Reanimate are just protected pillars and therefore can't be gone after, the way that it seems like Ancient Tomb and Days have just sort of fallen into this spot where they're never going to be touched no matter how many cards they put on the ban list. If that is true of Entomb and Reanimate as well, then I think it just has to be we collectively agree that means if a fatty coming into play on your turn 2 at the earliest on the play is effectively game over and becomes the best version of anything and obsoletes everything else, that like any other fatty that would be in consideration, then it's got to go. And that's just the same thing like Psychic Frog, Dreadhorde Arcanist, and Special Iteration, Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah, it's the same. It lives in the exact same space. Yeah, you're right. The 2 mana draw twos. We're done.
We just 2 mana draw twos. Like, there is a threshold of card that every time that type of card comes in, we just know that it's going to follow the exact same path. And if Entomb and Reanimate have to have their own subsection of cards that like follow that same thing for their sins, then let's agree on that.
Yeah. Pretty soon, people will be putting what's called Scaled Worm into play. Crawl giants.
Typically the cards that do it, like Arcana is annoying, but it's not unbeatable, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Like there's plenty of cards that like if you play Swords to Plowshares, then you can like solve the problem. Or if you play, if you had a turn to actually cast a spell before the advantage was accrued, like you were saying, like you put Valgavoth into play, it's like, okay, I can reach for Innocent Blood, I can reach for Curfew. Like there are answers where there just isn't for the other stuff. I think like if you can't actually design a card to solve that problem, then that is a playable card. That like there's Innocent Blood is not an unplayable card. Like if it solves a problem, it's totally
I have
reasonable.
Innocent Bloods in my like legacy black thing still, like just in case
Like,
that a deck like that. I could never imagine playing Innocent Bloods myself, but they're in my deck builders like pile of cards, you know.
Like Curfew Curfew has been around before. Like Curfew has solved people putting Emrakul into play, and like you get a turn. Like Curfew is around in Contempo or Murktide Regent. Like it's not the actual, like it is not an unplayable card by any means. It is a scalpel for specific problems, but scalpels are good. Like if you have scalpels, that means that there are answers to solve a problem. Whereas like you know, for the other stuff, like there isn't a scalpel for Sowing Micospawn. There isn't a scalpel, you know. So I think like if a card doesn't have scalpels, get it out of here.
Get out of here. Yeah.
But otherwise, where's the pulse of the format, Zach? Where's your pulse?
I don't know. My pulse right now is that we could take swings and remove, you know, Sowing Micospawn, I think is an obvious first choice. Of course, Bowmasters is a card I would like to see go just because like it's not doing anything interesting in my opinion. I think Black can find better ways to punish draw, like fair decks that don't draw cards can find better ways to design ourselves out of this idiocy, I would say. As far as Reanimate and Entomb are concerned, I'm not terribly offended by Blue-Black Reanimator being a deck right now because it's beatable. Like it's a deck that like, if you put in a Traxa on turn 2 or whatever, I'm a little upset. But like honestly, I'm not that upset. Like I've seen it happen before. There's ways to play around it. I think the deck is interesting in that it has like you can pivot and be like, I'm going to play fair, I'm going to play unfair, you know, like do your combo thing. So it makes it interesting to at least play against, because almost guaranteed 1 out of the 3 games that you play, one of those games is going to be a fair game. And if you let your opponent juke out of their thing and they beat you with Barrogoyfs and you know whatever, I think that's kind of on you, you know, like you fell into that trap. You weren't looking at your opponent while they were sideboarding, you know, little things like that teach you how to become a better Magic player. And if anything is an indicator about how, you know, powered or underpowered that deck is, it didn't put up great numbers at Eternal Weekend. It was one of the better decks to be playing, and it still didn't win Eternal Weekend, you know?
Yeah.
So there's that. I don't know. What do you think? Hit us up in the comments. Do you think anything? You know, we're lately pushing into BNR season. Do you think there are any cards that we should be talking about? We should be looking at that are cards that just
Cavern of Souls.
Cavern of Souls, yeah.
Get it out of here.
Get
it out.
Cards that just shouldn't exist anymore. You know, your delighted halflings and stuff like that. Stuff that makes so mad.
I'm saying if you look at a bunch of problems, if we look, I'm just saying we look at some of the problems. We're like, oh man, you know, Cephalid Breakfast Nadu or the Bant Nadu decks or like all the Doomsday piles or whatever. Like all those decks are good, but you want to know what's propping up that consistency? Cavern of Souls.
Cavern of
Souls is the unifying glue across all of that horrendous horseshit. Get Cavern of Souls. Actually, Zach, erase this whole episode. Everybody, let's get Cavern of Souls out of here. Get it. All right. Get it gone.
All right, you heard it here first.
Cavern of Souls gotta go. It's gotta leave, Zach. Wrap it up because I'm gonna keep going. Let's wrap up this like we're wrapping up Cavern of Souls time in the format.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We will catch you on the next one. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, hit the subscribe button. It grows the legacy content ecosystem we all love by relaying to the platform that you are part of our passionate community.
And to go even further, click the links for subscription or to support directly via Patreon to help us create more content for you. Patreon supporters get 4 exclusive extra episodes per month. If you're listening on an audio platform, head over to patreon.com/eternaldurdles.
Thanks so much for your support.
We'll see you in the next one.